I think the whole idea of stopping the expansion of the universe is, by definition, not an organic process.
Yeah, probably not.
Because the most organic thing is to let the universe just expand. That's what it's doing. So yes, it would be inherently unnatural. But
this is going to feel a little unnatural. We're going to stop your universe from expanding. Hold on tight, everybody. It'd be better if it was read by Christopher Walken. We're going to stop your universe from expanding. Hold on tight, everybody.
That's so great. That's a good impression. There is a chair in a room in a pristine building on a planet in a galaxy near the edge of the universe. In this chair sits a man. He is the last man of a long-dead race of intellectual giants. They conquered their own world, solar system, galaxy, and eventually time and space. Their empire expanded for hundreds of millions of years. They colonized most of their universe and compiled an impressive library of knowledge. They soon branched out into other universes and dimensions until they understood all there was to know. After 50 trillion years, their civilization had nothing left to learn. In fact, they had nothing left to do either. Having long since found a way to achieve immortality, mankind had forgotten what it meant to die, but now they had to relearn. For without any purpose, man's heart grew weary. With nothing left to learn, nowhere new to go, they had nothing left to do except live from day to day. Most had already lived for billions of years and amassed godlike powers and intellect, but the universe held no interest now that mankind's greatest work was done. And so, one by one, men began to choose death over eternal stagnation. Many millions of years passed until there was just a handful left. They gathered on a remote planet where the technology could sustain them indefinitely, and where one of the central libraries that housed the knowledge of man silently remained. There the men studied all there was to know. They would discuss topics with each other, play games, and remember friends long dead. Eventually, there were only two men left. They had both seen their trillionth birthday and had been friends for longer than most suns shine. They were having the greatest of difficulty choosing to die. It felt too much like giving up, too much like destroying everything man had ever worked for. Here they were at the end of man's history. Mankind had survived plagues, disease, and disasters of all sorts. They had even survived each other and escaped the steely grip of time itself. When a universe could no longer handle them, mankind had sought others, or created new ones. There was nothing greater or more powerful than the combined power and intellect of mankind. And now, achieving what many men had only dreamed of, these last two men asked, is this how it will all end? Is it the fate of mankind to simply fade into oblivion, to have their presence eroded by the sands of time long after the last man was dead and gone? They could not accept it. Yet the time came when one friend, weary beyond comprehension, came to the other and proposed they drink a poisoned drink together, so that neither one would have to be alone with only their memories of the other. His friend agreed, and they got dressed in their finest attire, took the highest places of honor in the great meeting hall, raised their drinks in toast to mankind, and drank their final drink. The weary friend began to fall into a deep sleep. The other friend watched with a sad heart. He apologized to his friend of over 100 billion years and tried to explain that he was too stubborn to give up just yet. His friend heard none of it, and indeed it mattered not, for in less than a minute of his drinking he was dead. His friend was truly alone. The last man alive took his friend and buried him. He had no need to say anything or linger at the gravesite for long. There was no one but himself to mourn. He drank heavily that night, and more than once almost lost his resolve. But when the morning dawned, he was still alive, and he went about his business. Having nothing to do but learn, he set up a chair in the central library in front of one of the computer terminals. There he sat every day, reading, watching, listening, and learning everything that mankind had to teach, hoping that something was overlooked, hoping that one day sentient life would arrive and seek the knowledge and wisdom of man. He would be there when they arrived to stretch out his hand in greeting for a whole civilization that was almost as old as the cosmos. Having lived 1 trillion years, he spent 1 trillion more in that chair, and he sits there still, ever vigilant, unwilling to be the end of mankind. And so it is that he became like the wise man on the mountain. He became the man at the end of tomorrow.
That's awesome. I love that story. And thank you for coming on and reading and sharing that. How long have you had that?
Honestly, I probably wrote that back. I think I wrote it shortly after I moved to Gainesville, so probably around 2002 somewhere.
Okay,
so
wow.
16
You've had it for
years
a while.
or so.
That's really awesome. Your intro sentence just totally pulled you right into the story, or I should say, pulled me right into the story.
That's fantastic. As an amateur writer, it's and also someone who reads a lot.
The first sentence.
There are certain key parts of a story, obviously, and one of the most important is the first sentence, because you have to pull someone in and give them a taste of what the story is going to be about, pull their interest so that they continue reading. And I focused on that a lot and tried to capture it, but sometimes it feels almost forced or like cheesy because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna word this a certain way, and it comes across, I guess, kind of the way pop music does to most people who are musicians, where it's just like, oh yeah, that's good, like it pulls you in and you want to listen to it, but that's because we know that like there's this formulaic method to it. And
I love pop music, for the record, though.
Yeah, so do I. I love pop music.
Love pop music. And to me, it's like just pure sugar to my music brain. I'm just like, oh, yeah.
Exactly. But I don't feel bad about it because I know it's designed to do that.
Yeah,
like, I would be a freak if I was fighting it.
Like, oh, my God, I just want to dance.
So, anyway, so I try for that, but I also try not to seem like I'm trying too hard for that.
Yeah.
And to hear you say that is fantastic because I don't feel like I've ever achieved that. And a perfect example is Stephen King. If you've never read his Dark Tower series,
no, I
you definitely need to do it.
Yeah.
It's one of the best series of books that has ever been written.
I've heard how he like weaves things together through the stories, and like even into like his other stories is like masterful. It's one of the reasons why he's as good of a writer.
So
as he
fantastic.
Yeah.
He literally ties his entire universe together, the entire universe into that universe. And runs the full gamut: fantasy, sci-fi, comics, westerns, history, King Arthur. Everything is mixed together, and it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, I've heard it's really intensive. Like he is a universe.
Yes.
And that's something that I know, like, definitely something I want to do, but it feels like one of those things like you just got to commit and just go through the whole thing. And like right now I'm reading Dune, so
yeah. So anyway, he starts the first book in that series with a very simple sentence. And again, I've told you I'm bad at quotes and stuff like that, but it is so simple, it is easy to remember, and yet at the same time succeeds so brilliantly. And when I read it, I was like, that's what I want. I want to achieve that. That's like so artistically beautiful. And hopefully I haven't made it sound, oversold it, but it's the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. And I'm like, it very accurately, like it conveys a very sharp image in my mind.
Yes,
like it's like literally he painted a very distinct picture. And I immediately see this, like horizon almost, like the camera's way off. And you see, on the right side of the screen, it's just a flat desert, the heat waves coming off the sand and stuff, it's not, the sun isn't directly at the camera, it's over the back, but the sky's lit up. You could tell it's hot and arid and it's just awful. And there's this man clad all in black and he's running off the side of the screen, and coming on the other side of the screen is this man who's clearly a gunslinger, trench coat or whatever you would call it. Not like trench coat, but coat of some kind.
Yeah.
And
like a hat.
The hat, the guns, maybe one drawn, and he comes running onto the screen and clearly running after the other guy. Very distinct image. And yet at the same time hasn't told us anything, so it piques your curiosity.
Right.
Who is the man in the black? Who's the gunslinger? Why is he chasing him?
Yeah.
What are they doing in this desert? What's going on, etc.? And I literally couldn't put the book down. Like, it was the perfect, like, if I was a literary addict, like, that was my crack cocaine right there. Like, that did wonders for me.
Right now. Nothing's like, the feeling of having a good book, dude, is like, because when I was younger, I didn't really like reading too much, but it was something that I started falling in love with when I got older, and it was rare. The feeling of cracking open a book and like having it transport you to that world is magic.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So to think that I could have accomplished something similar with that story is
I really
high
dug
praise.
it. And I like the because that's something I think about. I've learned a lot from the people who I've talked to out in the streets as I was or just performing magic. It's just one of those things that just stimulates conversation.
Right.
Either if that conversation is like you're the devil, or like, hey, you've got some very interesting insights on psychology. Probably let's talk about that. So I've run a wide gamut, and one of the things I think that touches on is have you heard of the God of the Gaps?
I don't think so. It sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah. You probably understand the concept. Somebody taught me this when I was performing magic, and it was basically when you start to understand something where the majority of people have a gap in their understanding, you become the god of that gap.
I got you.
And that's what he called me. He was like, so you're the god of the magic gap, or like whatever the sleight of hand. He's like, I don't know what you're doing. He's like, well, whatever you're doing, you're essentially playing like a god of that realm that most people just don't understand.
Right. I got you.
And what I feel like is that collectively humanity is filling up all of those gaps together as we move forward.
Of course.
Back in the day, we used to think having a seizure was like being possessed.
Right.
And we're learning more and more, and it seems like that's inevitable. Like, if we don't die, if we don't kill ourselves, or if we do continue, is there a point we will figure it all out? Do you think that's possible?
I do. So again, that's sort of part of my personal philosophy, I guess, which I didn't even have fully formed at the time, but it's clear from reading that story is unchanged in the last 16 years.
That's awesome.
Which is, I've never truly believed in infinity.
What?
Like, as a mathematical concept, it seems to me like something that needs to exist for certain equations to work.
Right.
But in a realistic sense, infinity doesn't exist. You can't have an infinite number of oranges in this bowl. You know what I mean? Like, you can't have a bowl of infinite size to even put them in. You know what I mean? Like, I can't fathom it being real. So...
so many questions. Keep going.
So... I feel like if things are finite, the universe is finite, the amount of energy in it is finite, etc. And if you think of information, which I tend to do, especially back then, as really just a specific arrangement of atoms, right? I mean, the thoughts in our brain and, writings on a piece of paper, it's really just, that's what it all comes down to, is just specific arrangement. If you have a finite number of atoms in the universe... Granted, the number is astronomical, but
finite.
All of the combinations of all of those atoms is still also finite. So that would mean that there's a limit on the amount of knowledge that could possibly be here as well. And therefore, if we live long enough, we would eventually know it all.
I agree.
So again, that being said, I, over the years, have loosened a little bit on that. I'm not as strict as I used to be. I still feel like infinity is extremely rare, maybe not completely non-existent. The universe itself seems to be infinite, and I would expect that the boundaries of it to be non-existent, but light itself creates boundaries, and within that cone of light, as they call it, where we have our experiences, there's a finite amount, and therefore our reality appears to be finite, whereas the universe itself is actually infinite. And that's sort of how I've reconciled those two notions together.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you. That's why I said I agree that if we do live in a box, if there is a container.
Whose shelf is it sitting on?
Yeah, something like that, I guess. Was going to be my other question, but I do agree that if we are in some kind of container, there would be a finite, a measurable outcome for everything. And then sooner or later, once you got good enough, you could start predicting that.
Well, unless you believe in quantum mechanics, because that implies that you can't actually predict things. So.
Okay.
Which I do believe in quantum mechanics.
Okay, so there's a specific amount of information that we just can't find out or calculate.
Well, you can't predict things because interactions are inherently probabilistic. And so you can predict there's a high probability of this occurring or whatever, but you couldn't predict for certain that is going to happen.
So do you think there's a possible way that we could figure out immortality?
Well, I think immortality will always be bounded by our ability to maintain the universe. If we can make sure that the universe lives forever, then we certainly could live forever as well. But if the universe is going to die, as most scientists believe, either in a big crunch or an infinite expansion, which seems the more likely based on recent data, then eventually we're going to suffer heat death, which is basically the universe is going to become absolute zero, and
nothing
will be
moves
really
anymore.
Cold, nothing moves, and
It's going to get real boring.
Yeah, real boring. So, if we don't find some way to reverse that or control that, then there would be a problem. I personally think that my belief is that there is a set number of equations of physics that define the universe, and that it is not that it seems likely to me that at some point we will understand them all, and we will have a way to control and even manipulate them. And when that day occurs, then we can literally stop the expansion of the universe ourselves. Even if we have to harvest, 10 million galaxies worth of energies to do it.
Are those GMO or organic galaxies that we're harvesting? Because I can only eat organic stuff. And if we're going to stop this never-ending expansion, it's got to be organic, please.
Right. I think the whole idea of stopping the expansion of the universe is, by definition, not an organic process.
Yeah, probably not.
Because the most organic thing is to let the universe just expand. That's what it's doing. So yes, it would be inherently unnatural. But
this is going to feel a little unnatural. We're going to stop your universe from expanding. Hold on tight, everybody. It'd be better if it was read by Christopher Walken. We're going to stop your universe from expanding. Hold on tight, everybody.
That's so great. That's a good impression. I love Christopher Walken.
We just watched, I know he's awesome, man.
So great.
We just watched, we were talking about this earlier.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
the dad at the end of it, because they spend all that time in the bunker. At the end of it, which I guess we could tie to kind of sciencey, because we're talking about Fallout, how to survive something that's like the never-ending thing, right? Yeah, it's the thing that's coming for you. They finally get out. He buys him a house, like the Brendan Fraser's character buys him a house, and his dad starts building another bunker at the end of it. It's like the cycle continues. And I wonder, are we just destined to die? Like, are we? Obviously we are, on our lives. There's a small chance we might live beyond the average human lifespan. But let's say, humanity. What if we're just like this, experiment, essentially put in a death box? Let's see if they can figure it out. But it's already impossible, because the point isn't to figure out how to get out of the box, is to figure out how to enjoy your time in there.
See how we react to the fact that we're inside of a death box.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't like that. I don't like that thought.
that sucks.
If I believe that to be true, I would probably kill myself.
Oh no,
because I would not want to live. First of all, I'm a very stubborn person. Second of all, I'm also vehemently against anyone controlling my life or telling me what to do.
Yeah.
I am an adult. I am a separate entity, and I can determine the course of my life myself. The fact that other people try to tell me what to do really irks me. So if I knew that there literally was some cosmic entity that put me in a box whose only solution was that I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do about it, and he just wants to, or she wants to figure out...
Or non-specific gender.
Right. Genderless cosmic entity wants to figure out how I'm going to react to that. It's going to be death. I'm going to kill myself sooner rather than later.
But what if that was what they were...
And not give him any any satisfaction. Which, like you said, in and of itself might be the satisfaction, because he's like, oh...
Yeah, yes!
15 million of them, killed themselves immediately after they found out, and the other, 85% did this, or, whatever.
It's all just a numbers game.
Yeah, but... Anyway,
there's so many things.
I don't believe that.
Right.
So
it's just an idea, right? There is one thing that I would like to say. Probably should have said this in the beginning. I probably should bring this. I think it's an Einstein quote, or I don't know. Maybe I'm just misinformed from the internet. But the sign of intelligence is to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. Can you look into the idea? Can you try it on? Can you walk around in it for a little bit, and can you see what it feels like without having to say like, I absolutely believe in this. And that's one thing that I love about our conversations
Right.
is that regardless of if you believe in it or not, you like to think about it. And that's, I think,
It's like when I wear dresses. Same concept.
Yeah.
You know, I try it on. I look in the
alright.
mirror.
Yeah.
You know, do I accept the idea that I'm a woman? No. You know, but I
But I
like
play with
to
the idea,
entertain the
yeah,
idea every
yeah.
now and then.
I'm a very hairy lady.
Yeah, I'm not an attractive woman
Yeah, I mean,
at all.
hair. Well, in the right places it helps. I don't. Yeah, but in the wrong places.
But I was so going back to the topic of immortality and
Yes.
whatnot, as you had said. I actually I've read a lot of stuff recently about the term they use is the singularity, which I personally am opposed to, but I didn't get to coin the term.
We're talking. Oh, okay. We're talking
Because
about artificial intelligence.
because
singularity.
yes, because a singularity, as everyone knows, is the point at the center of a black hole,
Pinch bump.
and they call it that because that's where the equations we have break down. Like things literally go towards infinity, which in mathematics is called a singularity.
Yeah, because it
So-
all ends up being the same
right.
thing.
Well, basically, we don't know. The equations don't tell us. Is
Kinda
basically
could
what's
be the
happening.
Same thing. The realm we don't know.
Correct.
Mush it into that box.
But anyway, to me, that is a singularity, and that has been well defined for 30
while,
years or
yeah.
something. So to suddenly catch that term and basically
it for
redefine it,
something else. Yeah,
as
it's not
something
cool.
else that's completely unrelated seems,
Cheap.
yes, cheap. Anyway, the singularity that I'm referencing at the moment is the second definition, which is a relatively soon to happen event, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years, maybe a couple hundred down the road, where our level of understanding and capabilities of technology has exceeded the point at which human life has to die. So, for example, medicine, reaches a point where they can extend our life, so that we can live 200 years or something like that.
Okay.
But during that extra 100 years that we've bought ourselves, technology, which, by the way, technology increases exponentially. So during that 100 years, or one of the ways that they explain it, so during that first 50 years leading up to that event that allows us to live another 100 years, we gained X amount of technological and scientific achievement. To reach that same level
Of growth.
we would only have to go another 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So in another 50 years, we've actually gone twice as far as what we did in the past 50. And then 100 years, we've gone 4 times as far, etc. So if we buy ourselves 100 years, we've basically bought ourselves eternity, because the next 50 years will...
The math that works out there.
Yeah. The next 50 years, we've not only bought ourselves another 100 years, but most likely we've cracked most of the medical issues,
Right.
and probably have bought ourselves another 20,000 years or something. And then by the time 20,000 years shows up, we've bought ourselves a couple million or whatever, until eventually we get to a point, if it's not much sooner, which I think it'll probably be sooner rather than later, we reach a point where we're either not in organic bodies anymore, we've transferred our consciousness to something else, or we have found a mastery over the organic to such a level that we don't have to die unless we choose to. We can live eternally youthful and healthy and whatnot. So that's what they mean by the singularity event. And from the foremost scientists in the field that have all weighed in on this, a realistic estimate is somewhere in the next 75 to 100 years.
That's awesome.
So it's entirely possible, and some estimates are as low as 50 years.
Yeah.
The one guy, I forget his name, I'm blanking at the moment, that actually coined the term singularity for this event, he seems to think that we are at or have passed it already. That,
Oh, wow.
that the people alive today, like the people that were born 2000 or later, have already past that point, because by the time they're 75 or whatever,
Yep.
the singularity event will have occurred, and therefore they'll be able to then choose to live 200 years,
Right.
and et cetera, yada, yada. So he believes that we've already got people alive today that will basically have the option to live forever.
I probably won't be one of those people. I got that feeling I'm not going to be one of them.
I've actually always believed I was going to be one of those people. I don't know why.
I would love to.
And I would love to.
Yeah, I think I would I would be alive for as long as I could. My ideal situation would be to, which I think comes back to your story, is if I must die for a purpose.
Right.
And I think that's one of the greatest losses that I think maybe even a psychological issue that our culture might be experiencing right now is that it kind of feels like we're coming to this inevitable thing. And like back in the day, you know, you had great heroes, or like you did something and served a tribe, or like at least like you lived a good life. And now it's just like, well, what did I even do while I was here, you know?
Right.
And ideally I would like, like even like, dude, samurais are amazing, you know?
I'm excited to see how you tie this back.
Oh, yeah, how I tie back.
I'm like, we're talking about singularity, immortality. Samurais are awesome. I'm like, all right.
Well, because of the way they would meet their own fate,
Yes,
and how they would,
Yeah.
you know, what the mind, which is essentially a logic system, I think, how it will rationalize how it uses its time, knowledge, and energy, and give it to a purpose when it fully believes in that purpose, you know. And even for like the concept of honor, like a samurai would kill himself,
right,
which is considered like an honorable thing to do,
right.
Or, you know, they would have like mercy killings, you know, to bestow honor back and like give people like within their society. I don't understand it fully, but I have like a little bit of a background and trying to study because I'm fascinated with it.
Sure.
But back to, I kind of might have lost it. Giving your life up for a reason that matters.
Right.
And
you were talking about people today don't feel like they have a purpose.
Yeah.
And I agree. I've thought about that as well, because I think that's one of the things, like, so every generation eventually grows up and they are basically harassed by the previous generation. Oh, you're not doing things right.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're all confused and this and the other. And again, I think that's
millennials.
like right now, obviously millennials are the generation that are the young generation, and the previous generation, the Gen Xers or whatever, they are tearing into them. And, you guys just don't understand. And when you grow up, you'll grow out of this liberalism and socialism, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And, you need to buy more houses and have a car and raise a family and like all this stuff that the millennials aren't doing. And what they aren't recognizing, the older generation, which the older generation rarely does, is that you worked hard to set up life a certain way, to achieve certain goals, and you succeeded. As a result, your subsequent generation is now living in a world that is simply different than the one that you lived in.
Right.
And for example, the best way that I look at this is in the previous generation, like my mother's generation, it was still women dependent very much on men for money, still requiring, you know, families and need to have children to offset the workload and things like that. Just in general, it was still this old, the old patriarchal society and mindset was still very firmly in place. Conservative ideals were still firmly in place. We needed to defend ourselves and expand and all these things to protect our way of life. And unfortunately, those things, they succeeded, so those things are no longer needed. So now the millennials are growing up in a society where we have everything we need. We have the security. We have the at least better equality, and the ability for a woman to be independent if she wants. And, you know, we're trying to overcome these things that have plagued us as a civilization for a while. As a result, we're able to sit back and relax a little bit more and look at society and say, okay, we've established, you know, we drew the line in the sand. We've established our area and our way of life and whatever. Now, what are we going to do with that? What are we going to? How are we going to shape that? What are we going to turn this into? And the millennials are now focusing on things that the previous generation couldn't, because they didn't have the luxury of doing that. And they're looking at the like collective soul of the nation. We don't like racism. We don't like people being sick and not being able to pay for it. We don't like, you know, all the atrocities that our previous generations did, whether it was right or wrong or whether it needed to be done. It's been done, and we don't think that it's fair, and we think that society could be better.
Yep.
So we're looking at these things and we're going, okay, well, socialism wasn't something that would have worked before. It's not something that would have made sense in the past. We hadn't gotten to that level yet, but it is the next obvious logical conclusion of where society is going.
Back to politics.
And as a result, I think that is it's an intrinsic failure of the previous generation to understand what they've created once they achieve their goals, and the new generation to understand why there's this tension and conflict from the previous generation. And inevitably, you have to just fluff it off and go on with your life anyway. But I think that's a lot of what's going on.
Well said, man.
I forgot how that ties in directly to what you were saying, but
doing something with your life.
Yeah, that's what it was. You were talking about doing it with your
justifying the inevitable end of it.
Exactly. So they feel set loose because they're like, we don't know what our purpose is. It's not the same purpose that our parents had. We have to define it for ourselves. And
such as life.
They have the opportunity to do that, and they're choosing what their purpose is going to be. And then the people that they normally look to for, like, are we doing things all right? And they're going, no, you're like, what are you doing? Like, you're crazy and you don't understand how the world works. And, like, they're telling them they're bad, and they're like, but I feel good about it. Like, I think this is what I should be doing. I think this is the right thing to do.
It makes it very difficult.
And so you're getting, like, these conflicting messages.
I wonder if, like, every generation, because it does seem like it seems like a psychological thing.
Is.
Like, you get the best parts of the generation that comes before you, and then it's your generation's duty to take the best pieces of that to actually, like, invest into the life form and process, and to continue the process of suffering.
Yeah. We're as much a social organism as we are individual organisms.
Yes.
And this organism is growing and evolving and improving, same as anything else.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, though, I don't know if we had enough. I really genuinely don't know. I don't know if we have enough, as much freedom as the previous generation has had.
I don't think it is, but that's because there's forces working against us, same as there's always forces working against you. I mean,
they probably dealt with their own problems.
Just like the concept of duality is intrinsic to nature, the concept of opposite forces are intrinsic to nature. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's just the way it works.
A really great, really great quote. It's hard for me to say. Great quote. I got to slow down and think about that. By Carl Jung. Something like, for us, it is said that as high as a tree grows tall, a tree cannot grow to reach heaven without roots that reach down to hell. And, I think it was like the most
poignant.
Dualistic.
Yes.
Like,
for sure.
So good. Yeah, they're the way we're tied to so many things. And then as I get older, too, psychological things. And then, like we said, we started off on the science fiction stuff, and we're bam, right back into politics, man. And it's something as I get older, I'm becoming a lot more passionate about, because you realize, like, essentially what the politics are is something I don't think you think about as a kid, is how your tribe's running.
Right.
And whether you don't realize it or not, the fact is you are interconnected to everything here on this planet. Like, everything has a consequence. It's small, maybe very, very difficult to measure, but it piles up somewhere. Like all of our trash in the middle of the ocean. Is that there or not? I don't know. I haven't really seen it, but I tell you what, dude, I do a lot of hiking and there's trash everywhere.
For sure.
I wouldn't doubt there's a massive amount of it in the... Supposedly, they're also finding, like, small plastic pieces in, like, fish and like in the...
I mean, that's been an issue for years, though.
Within clams, there's enough that it's like
nice.
It kind of messes up your digestive tract if you eat clam, supposedly, or something like that. A clam or whatever the other oyster. I'll have to look that up, maybe post a link, but our actions have consequences. Like the little plastic soap you use with the little plastic beads, they're like outlawing that because it causes problems and it's getting into the environment. And
nice.
Nice. It's not. Yeah, I know it's not purely sarcastic, but yeah, politics. We tried to. We kind of talked about this before we even got started. Was we were going to try to just stay on the sci-fi things this time, but politics are inevitable, man.
Well, again, they're the framework, like you said, that you construct your society around, that help you take it in the direction you want it to go. So when you're talking about things like the future, like where we are going to be and becoming immortal and all these other stuff,
Politics.
Politics is going to be a part of that conversation.
Healthcare, like how
Yeah.
are we figuring things out? Yeah,
Right.
it's
The only way you can get rid of politics, and hopefully pull it back around to the science fiction aspect, is my ultimate conclusion. In case you're looking for me a million years from now, is
here's my address.
I hope to transfer my consciousness into some sort of robotic entity.
So we've talked about this.
And with the ultimate goal being, which maybe not everyone knows what like nanotechnology is, but basically it's like little tiny robots or, you know, even semi-organic compounds, but they're under a great degree of control that basically once we get to the point where they're the size of a cell, they can act like a cell, but we can program them to do what we want, and then therefore have what appears to be a body, but essentially is composed of something we have direct control over, and therefore have much greater and direct control over our own bodies. So the robot body I want to be in is a nanite one, and when that happens, you will literally be able to do things that seem godlike now. You will be able to change shape, and you will be able to fly, and you will be able to, like, you know, heal yourself if you even allow yourself to get injured and things like that.
I don't want that. I don't want to. You're not even going to injure me. I'm good. I got nanites.
Exactly. I mean, you literally will be able to control nature on a very basic level. And one of the best examples I've seen of it was, which a lot of people didn't enjoy the movie, was The Day the Earth Stood Still. I think it was like 2007-ish or something. It was with Keanu Reeves.
I haven't seen that.
They take Gort, who's the giant robot that's sent to sort of protect him and his spaceship, because the original was like 60 something. And I saw that as a kid. I loved it. But anyway, they take Gort in the more recent version, and he's a nanite robot, and you don't realize that initially. So I'm kind of spoiling part of the movie.
That's okay. I love movies. You can tell me all about it. I'll still watch it. Spoiler alert, everybody.
But the end result is the military takes him and they put him deep, you know, in this like missile silo, and they're like, oh, like we're gonna like cut into him and figure out whatever we're doing. What they don't realize until it's far too late is that he's actually been intentionally like sloughing off parts of his body. The nanites go and they eat, literally on the subatomic level, are breaking down the silo and breaking holes in it, etc. And then when he eventually completely turns into a cloud of nanites, he washes over the earth and like very, very quickly just destroys everything. And this is the possibility of nanites, which is why kids, you should not play with nanites. They're very dangerous.
Right. And stay in school.
And seriously, a lot of people are terrified of us even playing with this idea. You can have a nanite, again, sort of, it's an exponential growth. You can have a nanite that sits on this piece of paper, breaks down its atoms, and builds another nanite. Now you've got two. They break down this paper into four. Those
Futurama did a great episode about this with Bender.
Yeah. And when that happens, you literally have a cloud of nanites with like millions or billions, or, you know, in a human body, there's like trillions of cells or something. Trillions of cells. I could literally touch this cup, immediately melt it, and break it down on a subatomic level and turn it into anything I want.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And so when you have that kind of power, that direct control over every cell in your body, and can make it shape the world around you to whatever you can imagine.
Oh, man. That sounds boring, though.
You become godlike.
Right. Yeah, you absolutely do.
And eventually, with this type of technology, we could do things that will accelerate our technological growth much faster than I think people are prepared for, such as, you know, sending a jar of nanites to the moon, eventually breaking the entire moon down. You would think that would take forever, but because of exponential growth, they could probably do that in like a day or two or something.
Okay. A few seconds.
A little bit longer than that, I think.
Depends on how many we send there.
My estimate, you know, if we send a jar of like, you know, a couple million of these things up there,
right,
is that it would probably take, you know, a day and a half, 2 days, something like that. Maybe a week tops.
But see, that would mess up the whole world, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but
yeah, that's a whole
I'm just saying, like,
thought experiment.
As a thought experiment, right? So you break that down, you now have enough nanites of enough size that you could create something,
travel the universe,
that could go to the sun and literally siphon off, similar to The Force Awakens, which I had this idea long before that movie came out, but they do a good job of it, which basically siphons off literally nuclear fusion, and particles directly from the sun and take that heat and energy and convert it into pure energy, lasers, plasma, whatever you want it to be, that you then utilize in other ways. And so as soon as I have a robot body, I can fly to the sun, give myself an entire sun's worth of energy, tear down every planet I come across, and build myself into this massive godlike cloud of whatever, and then just fly off into space completely self-sufficient and do whatever I want. So bringing it back around, that's the inevitable conclusion, I believe, for the human race, especially the millennials is where I was tying it in. That's what they're going to be. There will be no need for politics because we'll be completely self-sufficient and able to do whatever we want on our own, and we're all just going to like fly off in different directions and go live our lives. And then there's no need for the social interaction anymore.
Well, how long do you think it'll take to do that before it gets boring?
Well, this is the thing. So,
right? Because I mean, that would kind of be like at the end of that story.
So, assuming that our minds or our consciousness stays relatively intact the way it is now while we're in our limited biological bodies, we would still have a need for social interaction, but we would also have, again, one of the other things that you need to keep in mind, if you are a robot, right, you can literally jack into the internet and download all of the human's knowledge before you leave.
Right.
And you could process it much faster, correlate it, cross-reference it, etc., and then figure things out that the human race wouldn't figure out on its own for another 100,000 years or something as you're flying to the next planet, like literally that quickly. And so you're in a situation where you also have all of the human knowledge and am able to expand beyond that on your own. You can literally understand anything, learn it instantly, correlate it, cross-reference it, add it back in, and get the next link.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, we're all working separately towards this goal and becoming gods of the gap, but each of us are working on a different gap. Now, a single individual is working on all of those simultaneously and is the god of every gap.
Great way to bring that back around. That was a really good bringing it back.
So
recursion, I think. That was good.
Thank you. So ultimately, I feel like that's being in that situation. We could then find some way, wormholes or some new electromagnetic wave we don't know of, or some whole other method to then also communicate across the universe with every other one of us.
Right.
And I feel like...
And then we could take selfies with galaxies.
Correct. I mean, like, hey, we're at this, supernova over here, whatever, and
just chilling out.
Yeah, and send it off to everybody else in the galaxy.
Literally drinking champagne supernova. Or supernova champagne. Whatever. I guess you could totally
I mean, I guess you could, because you're kind of siphoning off the energy, I'm sure, and it's kind of like
what's
drinking
that band? Champagne Supernova.
Yeah.
What's that band? Oasis.
Oasis, that's right.
Yeah. You could materialize. You think you could create life at that point?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think life would be easy to create at that point.
You could touch a cup and then turn it into Oasis. Yeah. And you could have them play Champagne Supernova while you...
That's an interesting thing, actually, because...
While you drink
Yes, I feel like you could. Even without... You would have the knowledge of everything that's ever been recorded about them.
Right.
So that's one of the keys, is that you'd have to have something to base them
digital
off of.
voodoo.
Right.
A little piece of digital hair.
But it would be easy to replicate something that looked exactly like them.
Right.
That was human, based out of organic compounds, etc. That you could then even tweak and figure out how to get their vocal ranges to sound the same, etc. Right? So you could get that, but then giving them the personalities they had and the beliefs they had and things like that, that would be based on
God?
Whether or not you have enough digital archival footage of what they thought and what they said and how they acted and things like that. And again, it would still only be an approximation, but it would be pretty accurate to most people. Once we're at the point where we're actually able to upload our consciousnesses into computers, if that is something that is shared with other people, then yes, you would also be immortal even if you died, because somebody else who has this technology would literally be able to recreate you at some point and put your consciousness back inside of it if they were like, man, I wish John were here.
And you're like, oh, well, wait, I think we have his memory card right here.
There he is.
Yeah, boom.
Let me like, hey guys, how you been?
What's going on?
How
I think
long's
there's
it
like
been?
a thing on Netflix right now where that's kind of like a thing where your body and your skills get safe carbon copy. I think it's carbon or something like that.
Oh, is that what that's about? I
Yeah.
haven't watched it yet.
I only know like this the opening,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to give you any spoilers. But essentially, like this detective who has skills gets like hired by essentially like somebody who's like who's gathered these people's data and or person's data, people's data of people, personal data.
There you go.
And that just sounds better. And you can, I guess, buy aspects of people and instill those aspects into like whatever body you choose, and you hire them. So this guy's basically like you're talking about the accent, just like wakes up and he's like, why am I here now? Because he's been bought and purchased, kind of like a slave, and he's enslaved basically kind of by this guy. And
Right.
says, figure out, I've given you all these powers and stuff, dude, do what I ask of you,
Yeah.
or I kill you again. So at what point with these technological things, I think there's two concepts that I think are inevitable: the concept of God and the concept of politics. And I'm not saying that
Agreed.
God is real. I'm not saying that God is not real, because this is a very controversial topic, and I would like for the fact that the never-ending conversation for those who participate, for those who watch, this isn't like a pulpit for us to get up and say like this.
Yeah,
I mean, it
not-
kind of is, but not like there isn't really an agenda. This is more like intellectual conversation.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and we're also trying to get to some kind of universal truth.
Right.
And you're not going to get there if you
Can't talk about
disregard or, shun one thought process or one aspect of something.
Which immediately comes right back to politics. We can't talk about God without the proper politics in place.
Right.
And without the proper politics in place, we can't talk about our God, which is
Right.
essentially like, I mean, I like to think about, your God or whatever it is that you're doing with your life is what you're sacrificing your life to. Whatever you live the majority of your life doing for that purpose is kind of like what you're sacrificing your life to. And which would hopefully be, ideally, your God being your purpose. For some people that's Jesus Christ, for other people that's Buddha, for some people that's Krishna, and other people it's nothing. Some people it's themselves, and I think innately we all choose that ourselves for the most part.
Yep.
So at what point, I guess, so before we start talking about this, what is the concept of God to you, right? Because
The concept of God to
can
me.
can I ask you this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, what define God?
Okay.
Right?
So again,
You don't have to, right?
I've delved deeply
Right.
into physics
Yes.
to answer a lot of the questions that other people fall back on religion to answer.
Okay.
Where we come from, where are we going, why are we here? What does this all mean? I've always been a very logical minded person. I've always been a scientific engineering sort of mindset. An interesting enough sort of aside, which might be a whole nother conversation to have.
Probably.
Just the other day, I had a coworker comment, "You're one of those guys that looks at the world and thinks it's real." And I'm like, what?
That was a truth statement, but what?
he's like, I've met a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people, and he's like, I really think at the core, like a lot of people just, they don't really think that this is real, like that, or I think what he was trying to say is like that this is it, like this is the entirety.
Was he saying it as a compliment?
No, it was just something he was commenting on that he had observed. It was something he noticed about me. Is like I belong in this category, and there's also this category.
Okay.
But I had never even considered, and he was so right, that I had never even considered that there was another category of people out there. Like, obviously I've studied philosophy, and there are people that literally go like, what is reality? Like, you know, we're not even like, is our consciousness here, yada yada. Like, these are a whole other topics as well.
Deterministic versus...
But basically, can we trust what our body is telling us? Can we trust what our mind is telling us? Can we trust all of this stuff? And if not, is there something else going on that we're just perceiving to be this? And therefore, are we actually experiencing reality, or are we experiencing some facade of it?
Am I a crazy person stuck in a death box?
So this is what he was trying to articulate himself, which is, I am someone who believes quite firmly that this is reality and that this is real and that there's nothing beyond it. Like, there's not like, some gaseous, cloud entities that are like, I don't know,
strings.
like pulling strings or something. And
I'll give you some extra money this month because I love you.
When they smash atoms together, it appears like it's another person having an intelligent conversation with me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe that. I believe you are here and you are constructed of atoms and I'm constructed of atoms. And
it's a logical system.
We're here and it's described very obviously by mathematics and these laws of physics that we understand. And that is an entirely true statement about me. I believe this is real.
Okay.
I believe all of this is real, and I don't believe anything is unreal. So what was the question you
I'm going to start saying unreal around you. From now on, I'm like, it's unreal! Just to like, I'll just look at you and nudge you a little bit. The question was, what is God?
Oh, so.
Or what is the concept of God to you?
So.
Now, I don't mean to cut you off, but because I kind of wanted to, you don't have to think or say like what and the reason, I guess I should say it best like this, because the reason why I feel is the idea that we read from the man on the edge of what is it?
The man at the end of tomorrow.
Yeah, the man at the end of tomorrow. It feels like to a certain extent, if you're able to do anything at any given time, what is the difference then between you and God, right?
Correct.
So that's why I asked you.
There's two concepts of God. First of all, God the Creator and God, the like guy that's still here, I guess. Which in some faiths are taken to be the same person. Other faiths, there's, gods that did the creation and they were died off or were killed or whatever. And there's, new set of gods in charge now or whatever. And like it can change out. But I don't believe in a God the Creator. I think that, again, given the infinity of the universe, that it's infinite both in time as well as in space. It has always existed. It always will exist. And like a lot of physicists believe these days, it is basically more of like a landscape. And what we've observed so far, we're in some valley somewhere next to a lake, and that's all we've known. We haven't even walked beyond the shore of that, let alone up the mountain to the other side.
It's a good way of putting it.
Where the laws of physics could be entirely different.
Yeah, because you're in like this little fold where like a specific stream can kind of change.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you get the rainy season often, but you haven't gone onto the desert side of the galaxy or universe.
And so there could be regions of the universe that we can observe, that we haven't observed, that we may never be able to observe, with vastly different laws of physics where humanity can't exist or organic sentient life at all. Or there could be other pockets where it does exist, but again, we're so unfathomably separate that we'll never run into each other and therefore never be able to prove that they exist. But my point is that we lucked out. We are in the place where you're allowed to have sentient life and we do exist, and here we are.
Right.
That doesn't require there to be someone that said, oh, I'm going to go to this valley and then, form something out of the substances I found here because the laws of physics allow it and create life. Like, it just happens. It happens where the conditions are right. And when you have an infinity, a landscape that stretches to infinity in all directions, that's going to happen in an infinite number of times. So
right.
it's an inescapable inevitability. So I don't believe in a God the Creator. And I think what I have replaced is my concept of God, like the entity that most people attribute to being God, or embodying the idea that most people have. I mean, obviously it's supposed to be all-knowing, omniscient, omnipresent, like all-powerful, etc. When you think of that, especially...
That's a good definition.
When
you could do anything and everything.
Yeah. When you think of that, setting the logical fallacies aside, when you think of that in a scientific context, and you literally say all-powerful, that's the equivalent of saying all energy. When you're saying, omnipresent, you're like everywhere at the same time. All space. When you're saying, it's always lived and it will never die and it's throughout all time, you're like, okay, that's all of time. So when you start looking at this and you say all of the energy, all of the space, all of the time, all of the knowledge, everything that exists in the universe, you've literally just described the universe. So I believe the universe itself, the energy that is the universe, that is you and me and this table and this world and the galaxy and everything, is a complex interaction of energy based on a given set of equations, and due to emergent complexity or emergent properties based on the complexity of this interaction, it has the appearance or maybe even the actuality of intelligence, sentience, some sort of direction, purpose, etc. So I think the universe itself is alive in a sense, and that it is God, and as a result, we are all a part of that.
That's awesome. Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita? It's the Hindu religion's really similar to that. That essentially everything is God playing hide and go seek with itself. So that, like, essentially I am God allowing you to be you, to give you the benefit and the enjoyment of conversation, and you're doing the same thing for me.
Nice.
So that you become in this perfect balance with your reality, and that, you know, that God is also being the table, and it's, you are humble enough to be the table for yourself that you can rest your arms on like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept, man.
Yeah.
It's really cool that I read the Bhagavad Gita like it's so cool, man. It's really only like 700 stanzas, but I totally agree with you. It's way bigger than I think some guy with like a white beard
Right.
sitting in a chair in the clouds. You know, the complexity. I think at any time you look at the universe and just try to understand it, it's like, oh man, that is just amazing. It really is, man. And I think what you said was really beautiful as well.
Thank you.
To think that deep, I think that thinking in that way allows you to break down the barriers between like what's going on, and that's why I think both you and I try to solve problems as deeply as we try to, because it's like, well, I'm tied to these other people that are, here we come back to politics, as I try to figure out what's going on in my world and wondering why I'm having these problems with these other people. Why do I have problems with people doing things that don't really seem to make sense to me? Why does it seem that they're causing more suffering? Why is that happening? And I think if more people thought the way you thought about things, where it's a more, no pun intended, universal concept,
Right.
we probably wouldn't have as much suffering as we do.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
And as far as like a meaning to life and a purpose, the best I can approximate with that I've sort of given to myself as an answer to that question is, again, sort of as a I don't know, an intrinsic property, not necessarily as something that is contrived or placed there by some conscious entity, is the fact that basically the universe is a complex set of equations that started with an initial, configuration of energy, and it is running through that equation with that energy to some inevitable conclusion, and basically the purpose is to help those equations solve themselves, basically. And again, we are part of that.
That's a good way of putting it, man.
So we are the energy, and we have to follow the laws of physics, and we're following those laws to the inevitable conclusion. We are solving those equations.
And everybody's got problems.
Just by existing, we're a part of the system, and we're solving those equations. And how we interact with each other is helping to solve those equations, and how, the universe, we treat the universe and how it treats us and stuff. It's all just one big set of equations being solved.
That's a really, yeah, keep going.
I feel like that's the purpose of our life, is to live, to do things, to interact, to contribute to that solution,
Brings me back to the end of your short story, and why I think it obviously resonates, coming specifically from you, is that at the end of, that massive amount of work cannot be for nothing. You can't figure out the universe, referencing the story in the beginning.
Right.
Man, what's going on there, and that's very frustrating. It wasn't doing this last time.
There's going to be a lot of kittens in this video.
There's going to be a lot of kittens in the video. People are like, what the hell's going on? Like, can I take this seriously? Should I not? I don't know. But referencing back to your short story was, it can't be for nothing.
Right.
I refuse to believe that as well. I don't think that I'm here. And I know there are like a lot of people, especially like if you talk to anybody like on a philosophical level, talking about like determinism or anything where it's like we're just this thing and then that you just whatever you want to make is whatever you can just do whatever the hell you want with your life and whatever we all die at the end. And I don't think that's the case, man. I mean I guess it could be the case for them. I guess because you have the free will to choose that. But I do think that I'm here for a purpose, you know. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I've got to be like Mother Teresa or Gandhi or something like that. Though it would be awesome if I found such a massive purpose to dedicate my life to. But it definitely isn't for working at McDonald's. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I do think that there is a bigger purpose, man. And I think if like we were just talking about how you went to you were on your trip and you were hiking, as I
in Ohio.
Okay, well I noticed my privacy skills. I was trying to keep.
Oh.
I don't know. Like I don't want to say too much about like what we talk about.
If there's any time travelers out there, don't go back in time and find me in Ohio.
Hiking somewhere in Ohio. And you were talking about.
You gave away my exact spatial and temporal coordinates. How dare you?
All of a sudden, you just no
erased from existence.
Now you're forever stuck sitting in a chair at the edge of tomorrow. Not here. We'll put some like sound effects there. No, but I was saying like you were experiencing, we talked about like just beautiful things, like where you were walking through caves where like water had run through and stuff. And I feel like if you've ever been in anywhere close to something like that, you just kind of feel like this life is a really beautiful, amazing thing.
Right.
And it's just, I don't think it can be
majestic
for nothing.
for sure.
It is, yeah, it's majestic.
And when you look at how majestic it is, you have to assume that there's a point.
Yeah.
But again, based on my beliefs, the way I see things, it doesn't matter what you do, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing because you can't not fulfill your function, which is to be a part of the equation, to be a part of the solution. So if I go and I observe these rocks and these caves and these trails in Ohio and I'm awed by it, it's not a waste of my time from what I'm like supposed to be doing. There's not like one dedicated thing. I'm living my life. I'm following the path that I'm supposed to. And there's no way for me to like, even at the end of my life, look back and go like, oh, that's why I did that because that was my path. No, everything I did had a purpose, had a reason. I had some interaction, whether it's conscious to me or I'm aware of it or not, where I affected something that affected an animal or affected another person or affected the course of a river or something, or where I interacted with someone and affected their life and then they went off and affected other things. Like, it doesn't matter what I did, I was there doing that for a reason, and that reason is my life, like the path that I had to take.
So that kind of sounds like destiny. Do you think... maybe yes and no, right?
Yeah, I guess. I never thought of it that way.
Because I've thought about this. I've wrestled with this idea too. Like, do I have a destiny? Do I not? And I think you kind of do, because no matter what you do, like whatever way, you're only going to live one life. Yeah. Supposedly, right? Let's all assume. Sure. I think we can assume that comfortably.
Yeah. No offense to religions out there. Yeah.
You can only live one
faith.
Yeah. You can only live one life. At the end of it, you die. Right? You could have taken like all like. You could, let's just say for fun, and almost a seemingly infinite amount of decisions and could have ended up anywhere, but you could only, at the end of it, you've only done one.
Correct.
Doesn't matter what you could have done. When you look back at the right before you die, you could look back and you could say, I lived that one life right there. That could be like your destiny, right?
So this is a very good concept, and this is something that I have I've struggled to wrap my brain around for a while. So it was Einstein that thought of when he first realized that time and space were the same facet, different properties of like the same entity that he eventually called space-time.
I wonder how he came up with that name.
I don't know.
Sorry.
He must have been high. He's like, dude, space and time, man. They're like the same thing, man. Like they're like a space time.
That's it, man. That's good stuff. I've done it. I've done what needed to be done. I've solved the problem.
And then there's that like sober friend on the couch next to him going like, what is he talking about?
Dude, you need to stop.
You've had too much. I knew that he spent the last portion of his life helping the the nation of Israel establish itself after the end of World War II, with the League of Nations and stuff like that. So it was I was pretty sure he did that, and then shortly after that he died. So I was like, I'm pretty sure it was the 50s, but
I'm bad with that kind of stuff. I'm trying my best to dive into that and learn it.
I actually have a book here. It's a bright orange book. You can't miss it. And it's supposed to be about entanglement, but the pleasantly surprised, by the way, it was mostly about the life stories of all the physicists involved with coming up with and forming and having this idea.
Oh wow.
The Copenhagen Convention, I think they called it, or the Copenhagen meetings or something like that. Basically, a lot of the physicists back in the day, like in the 20s, I think, or whatever, they would meet in Copenhagen every year, and they would just sit down and they would talk. And of course, you had basically Einstein, the giant, on one side, and the people that were like his groupies, in the physics field. They were all like,
Team Einstein, Team Einstein.
Yeah. They were on one side, and then on the other side you had Schrödinger and his group that were formulating the new concept of quantum mechanics. And of course, it was hotly debated because everyone up to that point of any intelligence was like, obviously the universe follows very set, rigid guidelines. I mean, Einstein himself was a religious man. And he believed that there was a God, and he believed that God did not play dice with the universe, as he put it. So he did not believe that God would create a universe where you couldn't point and go, there's that particle, there's this particle, they're going in this direction, they're going to collide here. The fact that you go, well, it's somewhere around here, they may be heading this direction, and possibly with a 25% chance they'll hit somewhere in this region. He's like, how do we get all this from that randomness? Like, that seems like there'd be a lot of near misses or something, and you'd have like, chaos. You wouldn't have the success that we have. So for him, quantum mechanics didn't make sense, and he was hotly against it up until the day he died. And so, of course, Schrödinger had the math on his side, and he kept, so every year they'd go there, and, Einstein, he was like me. He likes to do all his work in his head. He's very visual. And so he would do his thought experiment. So, that's how he achieved his successes with special relativity and stuff. He imagined a spaceship out there, like running next to a train, and the train, is going the speed of light, and the spaceship is approaching the speed of light, and how would it look like if like a guy was on there flashing a flashlight, which is also going at the speed of light at the other guy, and things like that. And it was things like this that eventually made him realize come to the conclusions he did. So he would come every year, and he'd have a new thought experiment. He'd throw it at Schrödinger, and he'd like, I tore down everything you said about quantum mechanics. Suck it, bitches. And then they'd walk out.
# Team Einstein.
And then they'd walk. Exactly.
Yeah, I think Einstein started the dab.
I think so. And then they'd walk out, and then Schrödinger would be sitting there stewing. He's like, I know he's wrong because the math says he's wrong. And I believe the math. I trust the math. Math is infallible. And so he'd spend a whole year like wrestling with this idea and trying to figure out where the holes are in his thought experiment. He'd figure it out. They'd come back the next year, and he'd be like, right here. This is why you're wrong. And then Einstein's like, yeah, but what about this? And he'd, modified version of it or something. And he'd throw it out there, and he'd like, all right,
damn you,
peace out. And so they did this for many years, and again, they tell you about all that stuff in the book, all this interaction, and it was friendly, like obviously making it sound a little more hostile, but it wasn't. It was just like
they knew it had to be done.
Yeah, and honestly, I can't imagine us being where we're at if they didn't have those conventions and they didn't like compete against each other like that. If either of them had backed down or something, you know. Oh, you're right. There's no quantum mechanics.
Or if they both got participation trophies and walked away satisfied, they probably would have never figured those things out. I don't know how I feel about participation trophies.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
I feel like it's important for people to feel good about themselves, but
Yep.
I don't think that we should make them feel good about themselves for something that they didn't do.
I agree.
Like, participating basically makes it seem like everybody gets a prize, when really what we should be doing is going, well, this guy is the fastest runner or something, but what are you good at? What is your talent? What is your specialty? And instead going, okay, well, he won the award this time, but next time you win the award because we're having an event that highlights your talents.
Right. Dude, when I was a kid, total side note, my school was big on basketball, dude. It was just like, I was literally one of the kids, like, I signed up for basketball because it was like social pressure and it was like the thing, and like my parents were just like, yeah, I guess, you know, that's what you do. Like, I felt no pressure whatsoever. I wasn't like, I gotta do this. Like, nobody was like, play basketball, you know. But there was just a lot of like, I just guess this is what everybody's doing it, so I guess I'm just gonna play. And I had no idea how the game worked. I just ran around the court and I was just like, I don't understand. Like, everyone seems to be getting really into this, and I'm just kind of like running around the court. I didn't really pay attention to things unless I really wanted to. And basketball was not one of them. Not at all. And one time I caught the ball and I was like, I did it. I played basketball. I did it. I got it now.
I'm a basketball player.
I am. I touched the ball. I caught the ball and I passed it to someone else, and I was like, fuck yeah. I felt really good about myself. I did, dude. I was like, I did it. I was like, I think I'm getting it. It felt good when I had the ball. People were like screaming. They're like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I did it. I was like, all right, but I don't really know what to do, so I just passed it. Anyway, but, you know, if I had got a trophy and kept trying to do basketball on it, you know, that would have led me to, like, nowhere near what I am supposed to do with my life.
No.
Definitely not. I'm not, like, I still run, like, I do some athletic stuff and I exercise, but, like, I'm an artist. You know, like, and I think that you kind of are supposed to get some negative feedback is just as important as positive feedback, which is essentially what we're talking about with Einstein and Schrodinger. Yeah, you have to Schrodinger. If there wasn't an Einstein to stand up to him and say like, and give him negative feedback, we could have been potentially going down the wrong road with, there's consequences. There's consequences without feedback. There are consequences, both positive and negative.
Only variation is I would call that constructive feedback, rather than negative, because it's not really negative. It wasn't presented in a negative way, nor was it intended to be demeaning or anything like that. It was contrary to what he thought.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put like you need to like beat people when they can't play basketball. I mean negative.
And I know you didn't mean that, and I'm sure that's what our audience of millions also.
You know, man, there's millions of fans. Part of me wondered like
I can hear them screaming out there. Like,
oh my God.
Intellectual guts. Take your shirt off.
Like hashtag never-ending conversation.
I used to do that for a while when I would because I've never been an artist. I've never been very musically.
Well, I don't know. I could debate you on that. I could debate you with that.
So within the last few years, I've come to realize that writing is my art. Yeah. And for my entire life, for some reason, I never considered that writing could be an art.
You should do more.
But I've never been musically talented. I've never been able to paint, etc. But I like to support artists because I can't. And because I think it's necessary, and and it's beautiful, and it enriches everyone's lives. So one of the things I used to do when I would go see my friends perform, I'd always be that guy when there's like a lull after everyone's done clapping, and be like, "Take your shirt off!" And I always thought it was like really, really funny. And what I didn't realize is that I think it was embarrassing to a lot of them, and sort of like brought them out of whatever zone they were in, and they felt suddenly self-conscious. And one of my friends, he's the drummer in this band, and I guess he's got some body, issues or whatever. So he was apparently it was like a real insecurity of him being like seen without a shirt on and stuff. And so I did that the first few times I saw him perform, and then as he sort of like I guess got more comfortable with me or something, he was like, dude, you got to stop doing that. Oh man. And like he let me know like it was like a big thing to him, and I'm like, oh, I was just supposed to be funny, like I didn't get that. So I don't, but that's why I do that.
That's funny. I think it's funny.
I love it. I'm like, take your shirt off.
It's interesting how like we were talking earlier, the whole thing about like I laughed in that guy's face. But yeah, it was so bad.
No, get the fuck
Yeah,
out.
because I thought it was because I have had people. Dude, I've had people. That's the thing with like that's one of the never
If
ending.
I said it, it would have been a joke. So I can see
Yeah.
why you would think it was a joke.
Yeah, so for those of you guys wondering, for those of you who are wondering what happened, we have to recap because I think this episode is just like, this is gold, man.
Yeah, of course.
Somebody asked if I was using demon magic to do magic. I do magic tricks if you don't know that professionally. And I thought he was joking, so I just laughed. And then when I looked at him, I realized he was being serious. And it became a very awkward situation, especially since he was being very serious. And then with his faith. And then I laughed in his face, not because I thought it was no slight towards any religion. It was just I thought he was just joking because it's been a very long time since anybody's asked me anything like that, and it's never been serious. But they were very serious, and my point was bringing back to like you just never know what you're saying or doing and how it can like interact with somebody else. And sometimes you've got the best of intentions and you're just like, wow, that was like a perfect storm because I had all the energy to put into that to like really hurt your feelings, and that was not what I was trying to do at all. It's interesting how like you were talking about earlier, we all have our problems, we're all just trying to fix them.
Right.
It's really awesome that your friend was able to come to you and say, hey, and it wasn't like something that just was ignored and then just kind of festered and potentially broke a relationship that would obviously not need to be broken. And the value of speaking with each other.
Yeah, of course. Communication is the biggest thing. And if we are a social creature who is almost from birth understands the importance of vocalization in order to communicate things, and yet it seems like it's the single hardest thing for us to do, to know what to communicate to who and when. Like to figure that out. I mean, literally it took me 30 some odd years to even realize that I wasn't communicating effectively. And now I'm like, the last few years I'm on a journey of like, wait, how do I communicate effectively? Like I'm just now learning that, and I'm like, I have to tell people when I don't feel, when they make me feel bad, or when like, that I would like to do other things, or I have to speak up for myself and this, that, and the other. And then at times I have to prompt them to make sure that they understand it's safe for them to communicate with me and be like, hey, is it cool that I said that, or that I did this, or whatever, and just like it honestly, it's a little exhausting at times because I'm learning it, I think, later on in life, and like trying to put that much energy into being aware of what I'm saying, figuring out if it's enough or the right thing, getting feedback, and handling all of that. It's like I've taken like half of my brain and dedicated it to communication. But at the same time, I think that it's a very good thing that I've done and that I've developed, because I feel like both my life and the lives of the people around me has been enriched because of it,
I totally agree, man. And I think like if I were to point out and say like some of my struggles with communication is that I've had just this big mouth and I just say things.
Yeah.
And for a long time, most of my reactions were, I guess, kind of boisterous and loud, and particularly what I find funny and I laugh at hurts a lot of people's feelings, and actually got me in a lot of trouble in the military. Yeah. But yeah, I brought up the laughing thing to talk about how learning how to
communicate.
And before I give my reaction, try to think in my head before I act on those thoughts, because sometimes, even like you're laughing and you're having a good time can really hurt someone else's feelings, or make someone uncomfortable. Communication, dude, is a weird thing. Best of intentions don't matter. The results do sometimes, unfortunately.
And like you said, because I didn't learn it or learn the proper things as a child, my parents didn't understand it for sure. So I didn't learn it from them. And then I feel like teachers and counselors and things like that, they walk a very fine line around what they do and do not tell kids.
And what they
because
can,
they can and can't. So I really...
Because of God and politics.
Yeah. I wasn't able to... I wasn't taught, like, where my faults were and how to communicate and stuff like that. So, but you add to that the fact that I certainly don't see the world the way other people do.
Right. Because it's a very real thing.
And I never have. And things that amuse me are typically things that don't amuse other people. I see things I think that other people don't see, and as a result something happens, and I genuinely believe other people's perception of the event is vastly different from my own.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's some aspect of it that is amusing to me. An example, when I was a kid, I used to intentionally sort of do or say random things. And I realize now also that I probably hurt and offended a lot of people doing things back then, not realizing that people didn't understand that I wasn't being serious. I was intentionally being random to be stupid or funny or whatever. But I would do random things and say random things just to gauge how people react. Because even at that point when I was a kid, I sort of thought of people as organic machines, and the brain is sort of like a black box. And again, I didn't know this terminology or anything then.
Your intuitive nature was kind of discovering it.
Correct. And so I knew the brain was a black box. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know what it was inside. But I knew that if I sent a signal down this input, it would come out on this input, or this value would come out there, etc.
Right.
So I was systematically testing it in order to see what input connected to what outputs, and the combination of
what's
of
this
those.
button do?
So I would intentionally do these sort of quirky things in order to gauge people's reactions to stuff. And it's always amused me, because even to this day, I can be surprised. There can be you can say or do something and get a reaction from someone, and you're like,
whoa,
I thought I knew you.
Yep.
And I never thought in a million years that you would say that. I mean, I guess a good example is my nephew. He's a sweet kid, real lovable. And he's just got a sort of like peaceful, naive, childlike, I mean, because he's a child, sort of view of the world. And he's just so innately good. And he loves doing the like Snapchat with the Snapchat filters with my sister, and she did one of him that had lipstick and like eyeshadow and some earrings or something. And when I saw that, I mean, I've known the kid, he's 9 years old, I've known him for 9 years now, and I thought for sure that his reaction to that would be something simple like, oh, I'm beautiful, or something like that, you know what I mean? Like, that just seems like his reaction. And I would have bet good money on it. Like, I know him well enough to know that was his reaction. But I asked my sister, because she messaged the family recently with that picture or whatever, and we were talking about it. And I'm like, well, what was his reaction? And it turns out he got incredibly upset.
Oh, yeah.
Because apparently, as is common, especially for young kids, they try to understand where they belong, where they fit. So he wants to be seen as a man. So anytime she says or does anything that makes him appear effeminate, he gets like very angry.
Wow.
So his reaction was actually, no, I'm not a woman.
Yeah.
Like, why did you do that? Like, he got very upset with her. And I'm like, and again, like, add more data to my, concept of who he is and what is going on inside that black box of his brain, But that's what amuses me. So a lot of times, like when I'm laughing at something that no one else is laughing at, it's because of something that is coming into or going out of somebody else's brain. Like I'm watching these things, I'm like, that's strange, or that's interesting, or like, I can't believe they would say or do that, or whatever. And I catch these things that other people, I think, either don't notice, or they don't understand, or they don't find funny, or whatever. But so I laugh quite a bit, and especially as a kid, I would intentionally cause these reactions and then laugh and stuff. And I realize now that I think most people didn't understand what I was doing, and I probably was like upsetting people. I probably was unintentionally feeding on some people's insecurities even, and I feel like I probably made a lot of people feel bad, and I don't even know it. Because again, they didn't communicate that to me. And not that I'm putting the blame on them for not communicating, but I didn't know what I was doing, and they didn't communicate, and so therefore, I hurt people.
Yeah, I can specifically remember. That's one of the things that it's interesting that you said, like random, or did you use the word silly?
Yeah,
random and silly. I know you said random. You said another word, adjective. I don't know.
Funny, maybe.
Yeah, random was one of the words you used, and one of the
it is random. there's another conversation we can have about whether or not you can have a truly random number, but I have in computer science, you usually have a function in a programming language where you can actually just say, give me a random number.
But is it really random?
No, it's pseudo-random. And if you look into it, you figure out that's what it is. And basically, they just run a complex algorithm that does some sort of mathematical, equation or whatever, and then they take like the remainder, the stuff that's on the other side of the decimal point, and they give that back to you as the random number. So the seed, as they call it, that goes into that equation is supposed to be a random number itself. And a lot of times, like when you're doing encryption, they'll make you move the mouse around on the screen or whatever to generate that seed, because we supposedly are more random than what the computer could come with. It's like you can't program something that's completely logical to come up with something that it didn't pick up. So it gets some input from you, uses that seed to an equation to get a remainder that it then says, here's your random number. So anyway, long before I realized that, I've always had a part of my brain that generates sort of like random numbers and I guess random concepts in general. So I literally have this ability to, which not that I'm saying it's unique or that I'm special in any way, but I would genuinely pick things that surprised even me. You know what I mean? Like it was as random as I could get. Like I sort of like turn off my conscious mind, dig into my subconscious, and just like come up with something and then blurt it out and kind of see what their reaction is going to be to that.
I had a friendship when I was younger. And she used to do random things all the time, and it would frustrate the living hell out of me.
Yes.
As a young growing man, especially like trying to learn like how do I relate to a young woman, she would do these random things and I just couldn't figure it out, and then she would find them funny, and it would just be immensely frustrating to me, and mainly because it just generated so much confusion, and I didn't know if this was real, if we were like being sincere, or if she was making fun of me. And long story short, she was my girlfriend. And we were together for, I think, like 8 months. It was like a high school thing. 8 months in the high school was like a long time, And that's the one thing that just absolutely drove me up the wall, man, because I just couldn't, and like, because we had like these really intimate moments, and then we had, just awkward high schoolers, man, really. But yeah, I could definitely imagine your random behavior would be at least frustrating.
Yeah, I agree that.
Because you're like, what is going on?
Definitely people have told me that. Or like, so I still do it to this day, to be honest. Yeah. Like I did not learn my lesson. I pick and choose when I do it though. And I like it, especially more with kids. They're a little, A, more forgiving, and B, you get really interesting reactions from them. And I do it with my niece a lot. She's super intelligent.
It's also probably good for her to like critical thinking skills, as she's like, well, how does this...
Exactly.
It makes her just think.
Yeah, no,
that's a great thing to do.
That's what I'm doing. That's one of the reasons I do it with her more so than other people. Plus, she absolutely adores me. So like...
Probably because of the random things you do.
Well, that, and I think also I talk to her kind of like an adult and
plus you're
not
an awesome
like a child.
person.
So...
Who wouldn't like you, honey? Come on.
So far, not many. I have my enemies, but they're not many.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine.
But anyway, I love her because I know she's thinking, but she doesn't like to show her cards. So like, I'll say something random to her sometimes, and she won't give me the satisfaction. She just gives me this weird look, like I don't understand what you're saying, or I don't trust what you're saying, and I'm not gonna do anything with that. And she just gives me this look for like half a second, and then she like, goes back to what she's doing and changes the conversation or whatever. And it's so great. But I know she remembers these things. She's always bringing up stuff like conversations. She's like, oh, I was telling my friends the other day about how you told me X. And it's like, I vaguely remember that conversation, but wasn't that like 2 years ago? Like,
dude, the intelligence kids have is remarkable. That's one thing, like the difference between being a children's magician and being an adult's magician like myself, totally two different career choices or skill sets, man, because like entertaining and tricking a child's mind is totally different from like grown-ups are a little easier to coax into specific mindsets. They're kind of set in their ways, so you can kind of get a little bit more out of them by asking just the right thing. If you could pay attention to just the right thing about somebody, like for instance, like a strong man, like if I go up to like any strong guy being a small guy like myself and I say like, dude, I bet I can outstrength you in some kind of interesting way, he's like, oh, let's go, but if you said that to a kid, the kid might be like, okay, and just walk away.
Yeah, like literally.
Okay,
they don't know how to respond to that.
They're like, okay,
and they're like, yeah, that's probably possible. Like,
yeah. So like the whole entire
great conversation. See you later.
I'm playing with the sand. Yeah, they'd probably hit you back with something like, "Have you ever had a chocolate chip cookie?"
Yeah,
with,
and you're like,
okay.
Why you want to fight about it?
Yeah, the approach and like the mid game and the finalizing aspect of like revealing magic with a child versus an adult is totally different.
I'm sure it is. That's great.
But, I was bringing that up for, I think, the black box situation. Like what happens with people when you put an idea in, what comes out. It's kind of like the coin thing.
Yeah.
And as I've been doing magic for, honestly, probably, I'd like to get a more accurate number, but I think at least 100,000 people. I think I've actively entertained and interacted with at least 100,000 people, specifically because of like working on the streets. And then also
like as a streetwalker / magician.
Yeah. I used to wear.
That's what it sounds like.
A suit up top,
just
and
so you
then
know,
a skirt and some fishnets on the bottom. Hey, I gotta hustle. I gotta hustle hard on the streets.
When you say you were working on the streets, I just want you to know that sometimes
it doesn't come across the way. Yeah, I used to be a street performer.
I say you're a street performer.
Yeah.
I say my friend Amaral, who does magic as a street performer.
Ironically,
literally how I've said that.
Oh, thanks. Interestingly enough, like performing on the streets is what got me to performing into theaters and then performing for like major corporations, like
dancing on the pole.
Yeah, no,
I got you.
Like the Air Force, I do magic for Moody Air Force Base, Patching Air Force Base. Yeah, and it's weird how like that whole thing happened. Like I just kind of started working out in the street, and we're gonna bring this back to the black box, so I'm gonna write that down. Working out in the street, just kind of doing what I could as I just got out of piloting school. I think we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
And I was like, okay, well, what can I do? So I moved in with my sister, and I started performing more on the streets. And I did that as best as I could. And I did it for about on and off, like doing other jobs, mainly like getting jobs in like as a magician from passing out my business cards from working on the street. It kind of took off in about 6 months of like saturating the market and passing out my business cards. I would get picked up for like some jobs, and honestly, like, dude, I would make about $150 a night on the street, and like that was a really good night. Bad nights were like $80 to $90. But I was so surprised out on the streets in Gainesville, particularly because you would think like, oh, college kids, they don't have a lot of money. But there's just so many of them, and they're willing to give you $3 or $4.
Well, it's also a pretty good environment there.
Yeah,
like,
it is a really cool environment.
They're very progressive.
Yes.
And open-minded and laid back, and honestly, I would say a good 99.99% of them are all on weed at some point in time of their day.
The weed drugs? They're like,
they're high, so they're just like real chill and laid back, and they're like,
magic trick was dope. Here's $1.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you do any more? Because I need that shit right now. I had some great conversations too, because they're all like in school learning stuff, and so like, especially dude, my favorite were like obviously psych majors. They're like, can we talk about this? And I'm like, dude, I'd love to. Let's go. That's where I learned about the God of the psych major taught me about the God of the Gaps.
Nice.
But anyway, so the black box theory is because I've basically done. I have a core set of effects that are about 20 from like my grab box that they're just solid. I have the whole Bruce Lee thing. I don't fear a man who's practiced 10,000 kicks. I fear a man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. And so that's kind of like the whole concept with magic is like trying to find the best way to perform something that's going to be killer in as many meaningful situations as possible, so that you can become, the master as fast as passable. That's almost what I said, so I might as well just say it. Oh, man, the card's full. You know what? We're just going to keep talking.
Okay.
Because I don't have another card, and I'd have to go through all that right now.
Okay.
Maybe we should wrap it up in a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Because this has been a killer podcast, I think. Yeah. But back to let me try to finish the black box and put it back into your court. Was doing all these, like, these core effects, and then watching all the different ways a person can react to that, it becomes magic again for me, because it's like it becomes this random number generator.
Right.
Here's this constant concept, and yeah, there's always these things that I change, but this you could say the constant is my intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, as we know as human beings, you can have the right intention, and you can even try to say one word and say another. Like even your own intention doesn't even have full control over yourself.
Right.
And watching the different ways people can react to what I've seen, for, like I said, I would like to think maybe 100,000 people, maybe like throughout my whole entire life, watching the different ways they can react to it, from calling me basically a Satan worshiper. I've been called an angel. I've been told by like really older people that I'm wasting my time, and that they are wasting everybody else's time. Or that I'm wasting other people's time. Basically really awesome things, really mean things, things in between, really beautiful things, really ugly things. And it's, the black box as well for me, as I continue to try to interact with people's minds and see what comes out. And then now trying to do that with myself, with my art too. Yeah. And you're like, wow, who am I? As I try to figure it out. And that kind of goes back into, so on a physics level, the camera stopped for everybody who's now watching some wonderful kittens, because we're going to keep going until you want to wrap this up. So you guys can enjoy some wonderful kittens playing with this. Look at that kitten go. Oh yeah. So what is happening in my own mind? You know, like what's the best way we could explain, like on a physics level, what's happening in my mind when I seem to have specific areas about myself that I don't even know? How can I be myself, and that there seems to be some hidden aspect of myself?
You asking me that question?
Can I not?
I guess. I mean, I don't have the answer to that.
Well, you don't have to. We could. Well, before I even ask, do you feel like you might have a place about yourself that you're still discovering? Maybe like an unknown aspect.
So honestly, I feel like I've done most of my self-discovery. Like I have a pretty good understanding of who I am, where my faults lie. I've done a lot. I've always been a very introspective person, someone who's very aware of myself.
Right.
The difficulty is that I didn't understand a lot of things about life, about people, like the whole concept of like needing to communicate and stuff. So if I'm not aware that I need to communicate, then I can't be aware of how I'm communicating. But once I became aware of the importance of communication, I'm now intimately aware of how I'm communicating, what I'm saying, when I'm saying it, what intonation I'm using, etc. And so I'm able to correct it. So to answer your question, there could be things that are wrong that need work, or that I need improvement on, or whatever. But if I'm not aware of them, then I can't really answer your question. But at this point in time, I'm not aware of any. The ones I am aware of, I'm actively working on.
That's awesome. I love your responses and the way you think about things. I'm really grateful that you've come out here, and we still get to talk more about some of these other things that you've brought in that wonderful box over there.
It's a beautiful
What is
box.
that drawing?
So, I mean, if you want to get into that, it's a whole nother concept. So...
Why not? If you want to. We could take a break.
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know how fleshed out the theory is.
Well, we could run through it for fun.
It was just something I wrote down. So, you know, the way a black hole, or gravity in general, is discussed in physics is as sort of like a rubber sheet with balls rolling around on top of it.
Right, yeah.
And the balls are supposed to be, you know, kind of dense and heavy, so they create an indentation in the sheet as they're rolling, and that indentation represents the gravity well. So with a black hole, they always show it as like a hole that becomes really more of like a cone shape going down to a single pin-like point at the bottom.
Yeah, a non-dimensional point.
Which is the singularity that exists at the base of the black hole. But it's basically shown as a very, very deep hole, and as a result, the balls that represent other objects that are being sucked into the black hole are circling around it, similar to like those coin machines you see in the malls and stuff sometimes, where you put it in and it spirals and slowly goes down.
I love that.
So the idea being that around the rim somewhere is the quote-unquote event horizon, the boundary at which point that
there's no return.
That coin was actually a photon traveling at the speed of light, it passes that point, it can't come back out. So I flipped this idea.
Okay.
And there's a couple reasons for that. Probably the main motivation was a lot of people have conjectured, this is not my original idea at all, that black holes have like some sort of wormhole or gateway or something of some kind at the bottom of them, and everything that falls in isn't just being lost, but it's actually being spewed out somewhere else. And I've often tried to imagine like what that would look like, what it would be. Is it something that we actually like see every day and we just don't recognize that that's what it is, etc. And thinking about the whole rubber sheet side of things, I was like, oh, basically that would just be the same concept but flipped upside down, where you've got the point at the top and the cone going down into the sheet, and it's more like someone grabbed it between their fingers and stretched it up. Because at the point, no matter how fast you're going as a photon, you would never make it to the top. You would lose all your momentum and roll back down. Right? And then there would be sort of the inverse of the horizon, where if you're on this side of it and you're rolling down that sheet, when you reach the event horizon, you'd be going the speed of light.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you came in there as a photon, you pass the event horizon, you somehow slow down, you would go as far as it would take to reach the speed of light as you came back out.
Right. And so it's just something that I came up with to visualize that concept. And then what would you call this boundary? What would you call that point, et cetera? And then what would be coming out of the tip of it, if anything, assuming that these inverse black holes actually exist.
That'd be cool. There would have to be some kind of gravity on the outside. Well, what would be pulling it up and then allowing it to go back down?
It wouldn't. So again, it's an inverse gravitational well. So instead of pulling things in, it's actually constantly pushing stuff away.
Oh.
In fact, it's pushing stuff away so hard that at that boundary, it's pushing stuff away at the speed of light.
That's why the light photons would slow down.
Right. So,
but they would persist until the force pushed them back out.
Honestly, I don't know. I feel like the event horizon or inverse event horizon actually would be a boundary where if you're going the speed of light, the curvature of space-time is so great that even a photon would lose all of its energy at that point and never actually be able to pass it and get inside of it. But if you're on this side of it, like you were coming out of the top and rolling down the side like a volcano or something, then the curvature of gravity would be so great that it would eject you out as quickly, as hard as it could, and by the time you reach the event horizon, you'd be going the speed of light.
So technically, the opposite of a black hole could be a star.
Yeah, and that's the conclusion I came to.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like, basically, it would be a point where it's emitting nothing but light. It would literally be the opposite.
It would be
maximal light.
Right.
Because everything being ejected from it would turn into a photon.
It makes a lot of sense. Except
now, it's the only reason it doesn't make complete sense is it would be star-like, but again, it wouldn't be pulling stuff in, and stars pull things in. That's why planets rotate. So if you ever found like a star or something like super bright, because honestly, it would be like white, like bright white light. Like it would have to be something that we would probably perceive as a supernova. Right. It would be so intense, but we would notice that things aren't being curled into it. It's actually pushing shit away. And then we'd be like, wait, that's a weird star.
Yeah.
And then we would know that these exist.
That's a cool idea, man.
Yeah.
So I have this question. I've been rolling this around because we talked about photons. So supposedly, and you seem to have read a lot. If a photon, if we reach the speed of light, time stops. Right?
So obviously that's a point of conjecture. Not everybody necessarily, I mean, we've never traveled at the speed of light, so we can't say
we don't
sure.
know. Right.
And again, given what we understand about photons and traveling at the speed of light in general, that is in fact where the singularity exists in all of our equations. That's why this singularity exists in a black hole, because at that point it's reaching a point that it would be going faster than the speed of light, and we don't know what would happen. That singularity is the point at which a photon crosses that barrier. And we don't know what happens at that point or after it. And so working it backwards, like when you're thinking about something speeding up to the speed of light, we don't know how to get from this side of it to the speed of light, nor what happens when it's at the speed of light. But thinking about it and having read a little bit about it,
as you point to a box of books, I just read a little bit.
It seems to me that time doesn't exist in the same sense for a photon that it does exist for us.
Which is why I was coming to that point. So is the time that a photon is emitted into the time that it is absorbed, is it the same moment if time doesn't exist for a photon?
I agree with that assessment.
If time stops.
In fact, my thoughts on it are this, that as the particle, let's say this isn't necessarily how the way things work, because photons exist as photons and can only travel at the speed of light. So when they pop into existence, they're already traveling that fast. But
right.
If you were to imagine it, for the sake of analogy, as something speeding up, a particle speeding up to the speed of light, the point at which it's speeding up, time is slowing down around it, right? Or you could look at it the other way. The rest of the universe is speeding up, right? Because the faster you get to the speed of light, everything around you seems to slow. And the reverse is true for everybody on the outside. It would be going really fast. So if you imagine it from that angle, as the particle is accelerating towards the speed of light, time outside of it is going faster and faster and faster and faster until eventually it hits the speed of light. And again, thinking of this as in the mathematical sense of like a line approaching infinity, you're asking what happens when it hits infinity, but what actually you're saying is time is getting faster, passing faster and faster and faster and faster until infinity. So I believe that when the photon exists at the speed of light, it actually exists in all times simultaneously, because it essentially has all time that exists after it speeds up and blows past it.
You said it.
So it exists from that point up until the end of time.
But what if it gets absorbed somewhere else?
That's the thing. So I think the problem is that we don't fully understand.
Right. Yeah, and that's hard.
Time.
That's where we come into like.
I mean, we honestly don't understand what time is in any sort of real sense. Like we can't hold it in our hands or anything. So it's difficult for us to work with that.
The definition of time is like what a clock reads.
Yeah.
And
again, that's just differences. Really, our concept of time is differences between one event to the next.
Right. And trying to like define it as best as we can in the meantime.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
Again, assuming that my assumptions are correct and that this photon, as soon as it exists, basically exists until the end of time, would make it such that when a photon is absorbed by an atom and gives off an electron or something like that, that it's not in fact disappearing or ceasing to exist or anything of that nature, that there's something more intrinsic at play there. And one of the things that I think about a lot is, do you know what the Planck length is?
It's like a length of a subatomic particle?
Well, it's a constant. The Planck constant.
It's a very small constant. Right. It's a measurement of length.
Well, it's a value.
Okay.
And you can use it to measure time, length, etc. Basically, when you take the constants of nature, like pi and the
constant of
Coulomb, which is the conductivity of electrons and things like that, or the charge of an electron, things like that. When you look at these constants and actually arrange them such that you can take these known values that are not something that we've derived in any way, like it's not something man-made, it's literally like we've measured that the Coulomb is always this, and that the permittivity of space is always this, and pi is always this, etc. when we take those things that have just always been that way and that are somehow intrinsically part of nature, we can rearrange them, their values, such that, speed of light is, over meters per second squared, right? Or meters over second squared. So what we can do is basically factor that out so that seconds are by itself over here and leave the rest of the stuff over here, and then combine that with some other constants, etc., until we literally get seconds equals a number. So when we do that, what we find is it's the Planck number, or the Planck number. And that Planck number represents the smallest subdivision possible to measure in our reality. Like, there literally is no meaning to say something takes less time than a Planck second.
Because the Planck is the smallest measurement.
Correct. Like, you can't divide it any more than that.
So it's kind of like the bit.
Yeah, you could say it's like the bit of the universe. So you can take that number and put it next to length or time or whatever, and it all has the same value. So the Planck length is the smallest distance that you can have between 2 points. And where was I going with this? Oh, so at the Planck scale, it is believed that basically all matter, or what we perceive to be matter, is actually energy. And all those energy units that are being transferred back and forth that exhibit the Planck energy are in fact really identical. And it's more of like, I guess you could see them as being like semi-sticky or something. And as they interact, they like form globules, and depending on how many, what shape, the spin, the energy, whatever, some sort of properties, probably ones we haven't even thought of, at larger scales, oh, that's an electron. Oh, but this clump over here is a photon, and this one's a proton, etc. So really, everything is really just the same packets of energy at that absolute smallest scale. So what I suspect is that when a photon comes into into existence, it exists for all time, but that's because technically all of the Planck energy has existed for all time. And all we're doing is observing a true property of that energy that was previously hidden, I guess you could say, from us, and that even electrons exist for all time, even though they don't travel at the speed of light. And it's just that property of them has sort of been muddled or something, I guess you could say, or hidden, or is not, the right face of it isn't showing towards us, you know what I mean, or something along those lines. Whatever analogy fits best there. And so when that photon is absorbed, really what's happening is that globule ran into another globule, and some chunks broke off of it, stayed behind with the atom. This formed something else that we see as, neutron or proton or whatever. And then what's left represents an electron and flies off in the other direction. And we actually think that this photon knocked an electron loose or something like that, when really I think it just, that energy flowed like smoothly and continuously by
the next
sticking of the packets and then bouncing off. And it's really the same thing. That photon became an electron.
That makes a lot of sense because I think, like, so where does a photon come from? It just boop, pops into somewhere. It's like, but it can't just do that. I mean, also you have to understand, there's conservation of energy and matter and things like that, which has so far never been proven to be false. Basically, that implies all energy that exists now has always existed and always will exist, and all we're doing is changing it from one form to the other. So let me ask you this, and I think we should probably wrap it up on that, because we will be hitting a 2-hour mark, plus whatever we take from the other podcast. I agree with everything you just said, and I think that honestly kind of made a few things click in my head, because I do like to study this stuff, and I think it's absolutely fascinating what is really going on here. So like entropy and the decay of the universe, is this stuff just going to stop moving? If the universe
I mean,
keeps
that's the implication. I mean, if
Yeah.
it expands indefinitely, what you're talking about is basically infinite space with finite energy inside of it.
Right.
So at some point, it's going to be
Stretched.
distant enough. So basically, heat, right, which is
Transfers.
the other side of the coin from entropy, is random energy. It's energy that, like, when you smack this into this,
Yeah.
it creates, one particle that goes off in this direction. That's well defined and understood, but it also creates some, like, random energy, some other particles that fly off, and they go in random directions, and it's sort of uncontrolled, and it's not something you can contain, and you lose that energy as a result of the interaction. That's what heat is. So as it gets colder, you basically are saying that you can't have that random energy, and you lose the entropy, and as a result, that basically implies that you can't have interactions anymore. And when you have all of the energy in the universe spread, plank thin, and it can't interact with each other, do you have any sort of meaningful reality?
It sounds really boring.
Yeah. Like, basically nothing can happen. So, and again, since our definition and understanding of time is based on interactions, if nothing interacts ever again, then basically time has stopped.
So maybe we could punctuate this by saying interaction is the meaning of life.
Sure.
Or what do you want to?
No, I think that's a good synopsis.
One, right?
I mean, it is. I mean, it speaks not just to physics, but also to human interaction and
because we were talking about that. Yeah, the fact that this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Parts of because that's kind of also what's happening with the conversation. It's like you're this particle and I'm this particle, and parts of us are knocking off and creating other particles as it goes out into the collective conscious grid of the internet.
I agree.
We're floating around, and I wonder how many people are actually going to get to this last sentence, because I feel like right now we're kind of sitting at you have to have read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Of course.
I feel like we're sitting at the restaurant at the end of the universe.
Nice.
I kind of feel like that's where we're at right now.
I was going to make some reference to that earlier because you said, sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah.
And that made me laugh so hard when I first read it.
Yeah.
Because especially coming from a religious upbringing and seeing anything. So God, obviously, in the Christian faith, is traditionally portrayed as, you can't question him, and he's perfect, and like all these things. So whenever I see representations of God, specifically that God, he's supposed to be that same Christian, God, but portrayed as a little more human,
right.
and imperfect, and like whatever. It just tickles me pink. And so when the whole fourth book, they're leading up to them getting to this point at the end of the universe where supposedly God reached down after he created everything and wrote in giant, like, holy flaming letters using his finger this phrase to his creation that has existed for all time and will always continue to exist. And they just lead up the whole story to, like, and I'm like, what did God say to us? What did that motherfucker have to say to us? And it says, sorry for the inconvenience. And it's so appropriate. And I'm like, yeah, he would say that.
Yeah.
He'd be like, yeah, honestly, I didn't try that hard with you guys, and life kind of sucks. Sorry.
I gave you 7 days.
Yeah.
Really, come on.
I'm just like, man, I laughed so hard.
Yeah.
And it also kind of makes me, like, not as mad at God.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, at least he apologized.
My favorite line from that book was, I think, I forget the character's name.
There's so much that's quotable.
Yeah,
Honestly,
so
so I
much.
have a version of it that's all 5 of them together. It literally looks like the Bible, and it's got one of
that's
those
the one I
little ribbons
read.
and stuff.
Yeah.
So I've wanted to go through it and highlight it like I used to do my Bible when I was
yeah.
a kid, because there's so much stuff that's just absolutely hysterical. He's another one. Well, of course, he used a lot of drugs, so he's got that going for him. But he just has these, like,
I got that going for me.
He's got these, like, random
Nuggets
topics
of
that he just, like, goes off on a tangent, and you're like, where is he going with this? But it's so original and it's so funny.
It is really good
and
stuff.
somewhat insightful at times,
Yeah.
whether it's intentional or not. And I'm like, this is a thing of beauty.
It is.
And, some of it can, be like,
It gets a little weird sometimes.
And some of it, you're like, this is amazing. And I just want to go through and highlight all the amazing parts and, like, I don't know, go back to it and reference it like, some people do with, like, other religious texts because it is beautiful and it is insightful and it, and it gets the creative juices flowing and stuff. And I just want to, like, go back to it every now and then and, like, oh, yeah, there's that good passage, that verse right there that I enjoyed.
My favorite line is in the line he describes about the character's father's ghost was it was something like he gave him a sharp stare, and if his eyes weren't what they used to be, they must have been diamond cutters. And I was like, that's a really good way of describing a sharp stare.
Yeah, a stare. Yeah. Intense.
Yeah. I thought that was really great. I was like,
that's
damn
great.
It. I read that once and it semi-stuck in my head. But I definitely feel like we've got the whole... Because, I mean, dude, we've talked about it all. We've basically watched and unfurled the universe a couple times with your story, or we've watched and waited for something else, and we've talked about everything that I think you would as you watch the end of the universe.
Yeah. Oh, and that was another great thing about it, is like the restaurant at the end of the universe. Of course, I know I made the assumption, and I think most people do. You think it's at literally the end spatially of the universe. Like there's some boundary to the universe, and you're going to go to the end of it and see like the edge, like some wall between us and the rest of reality. But they mean the temporal end of the universe. So you literally get to sit in this like giant like restaurant that's a space station that's sitting at the end of time and replays that like on loop by basically watching the entire universe get destroyed, then backs it up and lets you watch it again and while you're eating your meal. Like,
what an amazing concept.
That concept is so fantastic because I would totally do that.
I know, and I think you only have to pay like just a penny because since it's at the end of time it always accrues and they have like an infinite amount of money. But it's not a big deal because they're at the end of time and none of that stuff really matters. They're like, here's your sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, it's so good.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
I know. So yeah, maybe we should leave it on that. Great work, man. Thank you.
Thank you.